Hello, if you're a subscriber, welcome back. And if this is your first time here, I'm glad you stopped by and please consider subscribing. If you'd like to see more of this kind of content, please leave a like and comments and questions are always welcome. Today, I'm going to be doing a demo of my TMS32010 evaluation module board. We'll go over some of the features of this DSP chip and the board, and we will see if it still runs. And if you stay to the end, I'll let you know how this board and documents could be yours. Let's go to it. This is a chip shot of the TMS32010 DSP chip I found in the IEEE Chip Hall of Fame article about it. It's not that good, but zooming in, you can hopefully see the TI logo here and here. I have no doubt this is the chip, and I think I can almost make out the numbers 32010 beneath the second logo and UC 9800 nearby on the die. What do you think? The blog caps off did a deep dive into extracting the mask ROM from a mask program version of the chip that includes higher resolution photos of the die, easily visible markings, and layout detail that go far beyond what's shown here. It was one of the first DSP chips and has several features that make it ideal for signal processing. I'm not going to go into a lot of details about the chip today, but I think it's probably pretty rare and historic chip. I doubt if there are many like this one in the wild, especially the non-mask program version, which was mainly used for development. I don't know. Texas Instruments TMS32010 launched in 1983 and was the first digital signal processor DSP in the TMS320 family, and it was fabricated using NMOS technology. As for the process node, well, the exact details are scarce in the public data sheets, but chips from that era typically use process nodes in the range of 3 to 5 microns. Given the TMS32010's release date and performance specs, like executing multiply operation in just 200 nanoseconds, it's highly likely that it was built on a 3 micrometer NMOS process, which was the cutting edge for high-speed logic circuits at the time. Anyone that has better chip photos or information on the chips and the technology used, please leave a comment below. Let's take a quick look at the system diagram. As you can see, the system is divided in two parts, each with its own data bus. They call this a modified Harvard architecture, as it allows the program instructions to run, not interfering with the data that is flowing on its bus, even with program interrupts. It also permits the instruction cycles to overlap. The load and fetch for the next instruction starts as it executes the current instruction. External data can come into either bus as well as being shared between the two buses. The program bus serves all the hardware blocks the program instructions use for execution, either from on-chip memory or external memory chips. The data bus serves the hardware blocks to process the data. The on-chip data RAM can be accessed quickly using two auxiliary register pointers. The multiplier takes two 16-bit data words, one loaded in the T register and the other from the data bus, and the results go into the 32-bit P register. A full arithmetic and logic unit, ALU, with 32-bit loopback is also included. The first shift register is for scaling data from the 16-bit data input to the 32-bit input of the ALU. The second shift register can scale the 32-bit result from the ALU back to the 16-bit data bus. The only thing I see lacking on this chip are hardware for processing signals, which TI surely had designs for, but possibly they were not process compatible or wouldn't work well with the digital noise of this chip. Mixed signal chips were still a few years away anyway. So, what was it used for? Processing signals, digitally of course. Here is one example to show how a DSP works, as it is a process that calls for fast multiply and accumulate. The TMS320's 200 nanosecond instruction cycle hardware multiply, the ALU, the shifters, as well as direct data access to the bank of registers allowed it to implement these functions like this filter. The average microprocessor of this era could perform all of these functions in software, but being able to do them in hardware allowed real-time processing and was very cutting edge. You can see it needs to multiply the last 16 stored samples with the filter coefficients and accumulate, that is, signed addition on all 16. The architecture works for many other more complex algorithms, such as frequency domain, FFT, DFT, and digital speech coding like LPC-10, and even some speech recognition. I'll leave links to the TI documents for more examples if you're interested. So let's take a quick look at the evaluation module board. Let's see what we got. So this chip in the corner, U63, is the star of the show. It's a gold-plated, gold-pen, ceramic package TMS32010 DSP processor chip. And to the right of it, we have a ribbon cable which leads to the plug-in. This plugs into your target board, so it enables you to replace where the DSP chip would go in your board, and you can use all this other stuff for development. Moving off to the left, we have a TMS9995 processor. This chip controls the board and runs these monitors. It's a pretty extensive monitor, has all the monitor features, assembler, disassembler, debug, editing. And this is the RAM chip, which carries your program. And one of the other interesting features of this board is it has a full 2764 EEPROM programmer, and this is the charge pump to boost the programming voltage up so you can program the chip. And these are the two RS-232 plugs, the 25-pin plugs. J1 on our left is one for the terminal we will plug into our USB converter. And this pin J2, another 25-pin connector. This is the one that plugs into a printer or a mass storage device or another processor. And these circuits here are the cassette tape interface. This jack is the remote control jack, controlled by this relay. These are the input and output audio jacks. And these are the power pins, the power connectors. They're hooked in parallel. So you have the ground +5, ±12 volts the board needs. And this little guy over in the corner is the reset switch. So that's the board, and we're going to go see if we can get this thing working. Okay, let's see if this EVM board can still run. The EVM User's Guide has lots of details, but I could not find a copy online. I will post this one when I get it scanned. The first thing I did was to save image files of all the ROMs. I used my TL866 program. I will put these ROM images in a repository, and of course there will be a link in the description. I did an inspection of the board. No signs of damage, missing or burnt parts, and all socketed parts have no bent pins and they are all seated properly. The board is in remarkably good shape. Sorry, I don't have any video of these setups. The first thing we need is a power supply. We need 5 volts at 3 amps, so my lab supply can easily handle that. as well as current limiting in the event that something pulls too much current. The power connections are daisy chained, so it does not matter which connector is used. We do not have the plug, but I do have some pins. That should make connecting temporary test clips easier. First turn on. Pulling a reasonable current looks good at 1.5 amps at 5 volts, and a happy little LED lights up too. Now we need plus or minus 12 volts at 100 milliamp for RS-232. I had this lambda supply in storage. I thought it was a dual supply, but it turns out it was only a single-ended supply with the ground reference floating, and it didn't work anyway. But it turned out to be a more interesting power supply and repair than I thought. It also may well be a historic device as well. Do you see anything strange on this label? I will leave a link to a video of the troubleshooting and some interesting findings of the supply if you're interested. The plus and minus volt supplies are mostly used for the RS-232 chips. I thought about running the 5 volts to plus 12 and minus 12 volt to ground because I know my USB adapter will work okay with those levels. But for the minus 12 volts, the other chips that use it may have a problem with being grounded. So I decided to use this setup. Yes, it's two 9-volt batteries. It looks like a mess, but I won't be using the EVM for any length of time like this. Plug in and turn it on and oh no, the LED goes off when I connect the batteries. But it turns out the LED is not a power indicator. It is to show the relay is on and the tape recorder is running. Next, we need a USB adapter for the RS-232 serial port. I have a 25 to 9 pin adapter that should work, and it looks like TI actually did the DTE and DCE pins correctly. They say it has self-satisfying control pins. I don't think they mean that they are narcissistic pins, but it means it should work without the RTS-CTS hardware control lines because they put pull-ups on these lines, so a 3-wire cable should also work okay. I will use the hardware flow control because I'm pretty sure that the pins on my USB adapter are connected, and I'm afraid if I don't enable it, they may be in the wrong state to allow the serial data to flow. And finally, I need to get a terminal program. I have one called RealTerm. I like to use it for testing in serial ports because it gives complete control of pins and input and output formats. Configuring the port to the recommended settings is 1 start bit, 7 data bits, 2 stop bits, and no parity bit. It has auto baud rate, so it defaults to 9600 after reset, so I will start there. All we have to do is connect the adapter to the USB serial controller to port 1 and see what happens. Okay, so we've got it hooked up, and I've got press to send, there to send, port 9600 on port 3, serial, that's good. And I want to make sure I'm sending a carriage return and line feed. Hit the reset. Power going. Send ASCII. There it is. Okay, we're in. Now we'll just type a menu. Half duplex off. And help. So we are in. Look at all that stuff you can do. There you have it. Sorry for the audio quality. I forgot to hook up my other camera and microphone, and it used a laptop microphone. But you only get one take of the first time something happens. You may also say that I only tested the TMS9995, and that's true. But I did do some poking off camera around in the TMS320 registers. And I even changed some values to see if they stored, and they seem to work just fine. I've been wanting to do this video for some time. I learned a lot and hope you did too. There will be a follow-on video about the Julie doll. I have more information about her, and we can take a deeper look than I had time for in this video. By the way, as mentioned, I will be putting up this board and the documentation for sale soon. Put a comment below on what you want to do with this module, or do you have a personal connection to this chip? How about to read out ROM images from your mask program TMS320? Probably not as fun as chip decapitation. Oh, and I asked Copilot, would it be possible to do blockchain SHA-256 hash with specifically the TMS32010? Although it says it's possible, it says it would be a bit masochistic. Maybe worth a try for demo purposes. Maybe we can work something out to get this EVM board in your hands to try that. As always, thanks for watching, and join me next time.